Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you have joined from today. Welcome to PASS Virtual Summit 2020. It is such an honor to present this session today in front of all of you. And if I am not wrong, probably this is the first technical breakout session, and the PASS Summit, Virtual Summit, the general sessions kickstart with this. So it's such an honor. My name is Amit Bansal, and I've been working with SQL Server for a couple of years now. My session about today is about developer best practices in SQL Server. I've been an MVP, MCM for a couple of years, and as I stated, a couple of years means I've been working with SQL Server for 20 years. And in these last 2 decades, I've done a lot of work with SQL Server, and the motivation behind this session and all the demos is to kind of package a few important things that I've seen with customers, specifically in the developer role, the kind of mistakes that they make, common performance tuning patterns that I try to bring today with this session, and of course, some of the demos. So hope you like it. I'm on Twitter, _Bansal, that's my Twitter handle. And I work for SQL Maestros, that is www.sqlmaestros.com. So with this, let's get started. Today, your takeaway is going to be that you are probably in the developer role. You may also be DBA, consultant, architect. Let me tell you, when we work with SQL Server, I don't differentiate too much in between the roles, because I think performance tuning, query tuning should be everyone's interest and everyone's prerogative. So what you're going to take away today is, in 60 minutes, I have 6 demos. So probably around 10 minutes in each demo that I'm going to spend. And these are coming from real world. I've created academic prototypes of them so that understanding becomes easier. Simple scripts, simple examples. And yes, I'm using AdventureWorks in many places. Just because I use AdventureWorks doesn't mean that the demos are not better. You can always use any database. The learning is important. So I've tried to simplify them as much as possible. So grab those learnings, grab those examples, and probably you will see that many of these examples are very relevant even in your production environment. That is going to be your takeaway. So let's get started with the first one. And first one is very, very straightforward, very, very simple. You might have heard a lot about them already, which is non-sargability or sargability. So I'm starting off this series of demos in developer best practices with non-sargability. I'm taking a simple example, then we will step up a bit and get into more complicated and more advanced examples, so to say. Sargability is a made-up term. If you look up the official dictionary, you may not find a word called sargability. So it stands for search argument ability. That is the ability of the optimizer to seek in an index. Now, all of you know what an index is. Index is a B-tree structure. So you have the root page, you have the intermediate, and then you have the leaf level. And when seeking happens, the seek control is traversing from root to intermediate to leaf level. Now, what really happens in production environment, and I have seen with so many applications, that even when the right index is created, optimizer is not seeking. Rather, the optimizer just jumps to the leaf level and scans the leaf level, which is scanning all the pages. Now, in most cases, that is not what you want. You want that the application should actually go and the optimizer should actually go and seek. Now, I'll share the very basic examples, the elementary examples to begin with, and then I'll step this up in the next demo and show you more advanced examples. So let's get started now with sargability. So I'm using AdventureWorks 2016 database here. Let's create a non-clustered index on this table, sales order detail. Our index column is modified date, and then we include another column called sales order ID, which means now my index structure, this index IDX SOD modified date, will have 2 columns. Let's go and create this, create it successfully. And now I'm going to turn on time and IO. Set statistics time and set statistics IO, as you may know, are quite useful statements. One will allow you to see the time aspects of your query, like CPU time, elapsed time, and the other one will help you extract information related to IO, like logical reads and physical reads, etc. So these are really good metrics and are generally used for query tuning. Now, here is the query. Now, if you look at the query looks quite straightforward. We are selecting a few columns from sales order header, and we join that with sales order detail and there is a join condition there. Now comes the interesting part. The moment you look at this where clause, I'm sure all of you are already guessing where the problem is. So what we're trying to do is our filter condition says that modified date should be equal to this literal that we specified on the right hand side of the equality operator. But the problem is on the left hand side of the equality operator, you are applying a function on the column. Now, what is the issue with that? The issue is when you apply T-SQL functions, most of them on the left-hand side of the equality operator on the attribute, then the optimizer loses the seeking capability because it is no more an attribute that it can seek on or the values on which it can seek, but it becomes an expression. So this is like when you apply the function, you're comparing one expression is equivalent to another expression. And then because this is an expression, it is not an index column value on which the optimizer can seek. It goes to the index. Yes, it does go to the index, but it does not seek. It starts scanning. Now, the whole purpose of you creating the index probably was that you wanted the optimizer to seek. So let's go and execute this and turn on actual execution plan to see what's going on. So let's go and execute. We execute and let's go to the execution plan. Now, when you look at the execution plan, you can see right there, this is an index scan. So let me zoom this and show it to you that yes, this is indeed an index scan. And this is what you wanted, index seek, but you are getting a scan. And are we touching the right object there? So let me go and zoom in on the tool tip there and show you, yes, we are actually scanning the right index which we created. But we, as I said, we wanted seeking capability. Now let's go and look into some of the aspects related to time and IO. So if you look at CPU time there, it takes about, okay, we spent about slightly less than half a second, right? So this was about close to 500 milliseconds is what was being spent on the time aspect. And you can see that the IO factor, right? We had about 337 logical reads. So keep this in mind, 337 logical reads and 433 milliseconds on time. Now let's go and fix this. So what really happened at this point is that now our query becomes, so to say, non-sargable, or this condition is called as non-sargable. And this is in totality is called as non-sargability. Now we got to fix this, right? So we want to make sure that our predicates are sargable. This is the predicate, right? So we want to make sure that the predicates are sargable. So what is the fix? So when you go and look into the fix here, quite straightforward. What we do is just rewrite the T-SQL to ensure that the overall query, the predicates are sargable, and this will ensure that now optimizer will seek instead of scanning. Now, when you are writing T-SQL, it goes without saying, it is a no-brainer that you obviously want that the query is logically equivalent. So this condition greater than equal to a certain value and then less than a certain literal is equivalent to what we were trying to do earlier. So of course it's a made up example, but if you can correlate this with what developers do in real world applications, you will probably get to the bottom of this. Let's go and execute this. Execution plan is turned on. Let's go and execute, and we go to the execution plan and you can see that, yes, we are now seeking, and this is what we had expected. Let's go back and check on the messages tab there, and you can see the elapsed time has, of course, reduced from 433 millisecond. It came down to 263 millisecond. But more important than that is the IO factor. Now you can see logical reads is just 3. So probably it is just like root page, one page at the root, one page in the intermediate, and one page at the leaf level. So just 3D. So something like 300 plus reads have come down to 3. This is the very basic example of sargability. Sargability is not a small concept. It's not limited to an example like this. There are so many different scenarios related to non-sargability and sargability, but I just wanted to kickstart the series of demos with this. Now, the crux of this, the entire crux of this is seek is not happening. You know, I take this from the customer because customers won't tell, hey, Amit, you know, I have a problem with this query. Sargability is not happening. My query is not sargable, or my predicate is not sargable. They don't say like that. They don't come with support queries like this. They would just say that, hey, you know, I created this index, but it for some reason, seek is not happening. So that's why I use that term, seek is not happening. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move up to the second demo. demo, and let's take up the second demo. And in the second demo, I'm going to go one step further with this thing of seek not happening and another developer mistake, right? This is all about developer best practices. So let's use AdventureWorks 2016 here now. And look at this query. Select start from person.person where first name is equal to Ken. Very simple query. And I love putting examples in a very simple way so that you just get the concept. There's no point putting hundreds of lines of code here and trying to complicate things. Very simple example. Let's go and execute this. Turn on actual execution plan. Okay, you get the data, but here is the catch. If you go to the execution plan, you again see a scan there. So if you look at the toolbar, if you look at the execution plan there, and I'm zooming in right now, and just to show you, you can see that it is scanning. Now, why is it a worry? Because you might assume, and let me tell you upfront, that there is an index. There is an index where first name is one of the index columns, yet seeking is not happening. So if I take the cursor over this index seek operator and zoom in, let me just go and look at the object name. Sometimes object names give you a lot of information. So this is the object name. This is the index. And look at the naming convention of the index. At least thankfully, the developers or DBAs have followed the a good naming convention there. So it says IX, which stands for index, person, probably the table, last name, first name, middle name, which means this is a composite index. This is a multi-column index, and the order of columns are last name, first name, and middle name. Now, this is what you need to keep in mind. You know, friends, working with indexes, with single column indexes is relatively easy. I mean, there are not too many complications, but the moment you start designing indexing strategies and you have to deal with multi-column indexes, that is where things get a little tricky. And this is the trickier part that I'm talking about. So this is the multi-column index, which is already there, last name, first name, and middle name. But what you are doing in your query is you're only trying to seek on first name. Now, this will not work. So a simple rule of the optimizer is that in a multi-column index, if you're not seeking on the previous column, you cannot seek on the next column. Now, I use this word previous and next because you can have an index with multiple columns, with like you can have an index with 4 columns or 5 columns or even 2 or 3. So in this particular case, if I'm not seeking on last name, I can't seek on first name. So optimizer will leverage the index that is there, but it will not seek on first name. Now, look at this. This example, person.person, where first name is equal to Ken and last name is equal to Sanchez. Now you're seeking on last name and you're also seeking on first name. So you can guess at this point of time, will the optimizer seek or scan? Probably you have the answer. So let's go and execute this and check it ourselves. And go into the execution plan, you get the output and you can see right up there, now the optimizer is seeking, and this is what you had expected. So the question is, why does the optimizer behave in this way? Well, if you understand the B-tree structure and how the data is organized in index pages, it follows a left-based subset mechanism, which means seeking happens from left to right, which is searching the data happens from left to right. And that's how the data is organized. So if I am not searching on or seeking on the leftmost column, it just cannot find the data for me by jumping somewhere in the middle of the string. I mean, in simple terms, that's where the problem is. So this brings us to a very important conclusion or idea about indexes, which is that the order of columns in your select query does not matter, but the order of columns in your indexes do matter. And this is a common mistake that developers and DBAs do make. So if you see here, select start from person.person, let me just change the order. So we say last name is equal to Sanchez, and let me say, okay, let's just quickly change this to, and first name is equal to Ken. If we execute this, I've just changed the order, right? Will it have any impact? I'm still searching and seeking on the 2 columns that are part of the index, and they are respectively the first and second column. How does it behave? So let's go and execute this and jump to the execution plan. And you can see, well, all good. We are still seeking. So the order of columns in your select query does not matter. Remember, friends, this is a common misconceptions that developers have. And I've practically seen developers trying to fiddle around with columns, trying to change the order of columns in their select query in anticipation and in hope that my query is going to work better or something, but it doesn't work that way. But the order of columns in your index does matter. Now, let's go one more level deep into why seek is not happening. So quick recap, what we did was we started off with a very basic example of nonce arguability, and the idea was you were trying to apply T-SQL functions on the column, on the attribute, and it loses the seeking capability. That was one example. We're looking at the second example of a multi-column index where the learning here is that you got to seek from leftmost all the way to the rightmost. That is the order in which you have to go, the way you have defined the index. The third example is even more interesting. So this was the index that was created on that. So you can see last name, first name, and middle name. Anyway, now let's go and look into the well, there's one thing that I would definitely want to talk about, and probably you already have questions that are coming to your mind. So I want to introduce you to Craig. I should have done that in the beginning, but sorry about that. So Craig is my friend today. He is helping me moderate this session. So if you have questions, can you please put down on the platform on which you're watching, and then we'll take up all the questions at the end of the session. So thank you, Craig, for helping today.
You bet, Amit. Amit, we had one question from somebody that had asked if there's any way to download the queries used during this session.
Yes, of course. I would just give out my email ID at the end of the session, and people can just email and I can send it across or put it up somewhere with the link. Of course, we can do that. Or even from the past Summit resource section, it will be available. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
We'll make sure that attendees have all the resources. So let's continue. So if you, where this could be a question that is coming to your mind, that when you look at this one, when we ran this query, let's say I will just undo this one back again, and where first name and last name, and if I execute just the first name here, and going back to the example, just to kind of give another tangent, another idea. So, scan was happening, and then you get a missing index hint. And when you right click and show missing index details, I'm digressing a bit, but this is important because this is what really happens is you have the right index in place. It's just a little bit of tweaking around with the query, but because Optimizer is not able to seek on that particular index, it recommends you to create another index. And look at this index. It tells you to create an index on first name so that it can seek on that particular index. And this is where SQL folks make a lot of mistake, where they will just go and blindly create this index without really researching or investigating that probably a similar index already exists. So a warning there, take these hints. These hints are good. They might give you some information, but just do not go and blindly create these indexes. This thing is coming up again in another demo, and we'll talk more about that later. So let's continue with the third level down in understanding why seek is not happening. And this is a common thing that keeps coming from SQL folks who work with SQL Server every now and then. Let's use AdventureWorks 2016. And there is a table here called person.person. And this is the one that I was using earlier, right? Which has first name, middle name, last name, business entity ID. And there's another column here called email promotion with 01, like true and false value, etc. Now, for the purpose of demo, let's make a copy of this table person as person.contact2, just for the purpose of demo. So we make a copy of this. 19,000 records come into this. Remember, the number of records are close to 19K. And now we are going to create an index on business entity ID. Remember that we're creating a clustered index on business entity ID. Now you have a table with a clustered index. No more indexes exist on this particular table, which you can verify from here. So you can see that only one clustered index exists. Well, there can only be one clustered index because there's only one way how you can sort the data physically. Now comes the interesting part. This is a query, right? Look at this query. We are searching and extracting data from this table, person.contact to, and we want business entity ID, first name, and email promotion, and look at the predicates. So we say first name like L%, email promotion is equal to 1, and business entity ID less than 10K. Now, this is an interesting query for a couple of reasons. One is that each part of the predicate uses a different operator, right? So in first we use like, and then equality, and then the less than operator. Now I have a need, let's say, to design a query, an index, sorry. I have a need to design an index for this particular query. Do not worry about option max top one. I can just kind of ignore this. It's not important. So let's go and execute this query first and see what happens. So when we execute this query, you get the data. Of course, you expect that. We go to the execution plan, and there is a simple clustered index scan. There are no non-clustered indexes on the table. So the idea is the optimizer sees, just go and fetch the data and do all our searching on the table itself. The clustered index is the data. It is the table. Now, we want to design indexes. Now, there could be a lot of permutations and combinations when you have to design indexes, but because of the brevity of time, I've taken only 2 options. So you can see option 12 and 13, which means I had 11 more options, but I've kind of just removed them out because they were not so relevant. Let's talk about these 2 options now. So in option 1, you will have first name and email promotion. And in option 2, you will have email promotion and first name. So both these indexes are composite indexes, which means they have more than one column. Both are multi-column indexes. The only difference between them is the order of columns. And you can clearly see in composite 4, it is first name, comma, email promotion. And in the second one, it is email promotion, comma, first name. That's where the difference is. Now, first thing, you might be wondering, where is business entity ID? Well, remember that you don't need business entity ID because there is a clustered index on business entity ID. And every non-clustered index that you create, the clustering key, the clustering value is automatically included in every non-clustered index because that is the key value which is used for performing bookmark lookup. So I don't have to say business entity ID in any of these indexes. That is a given that is going to be included. Now the question is, out of these 2 indexes, composite 4 and composite 5, which one are you going to create? Now, I may have asked you for an answer. What do you think? So shoot your answers, composite 4 or composite 5, but maybe we are on different platforms. So why not you decide for yourself that I'm going to create composite 4 or I'm going to create composite 5 on whatever your criteria could be, based on selectivity pattern, based on the operators that are there. Decide for yourself, 4 or 5. I give you 5 seconds. The query is right up there, and you have option 12 and option 13. Okay, so you've decided which one you want to go for. Now let's try both of them. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an index on, I'm going to create composite 4, which is first name, comma, email promotion. You know, in most cases, I would see that people would go for composite 4. Probably some of you have already chosen that you would go for composite 4. Let's go and create this, right? And let's understand what's going on. And now let's go and execute the query and see what exactly is the optimizer doing. So you get the data, you jump into the execution plan, and you can see that seek is happening. Yay, composite 4 wins. So those who had chosen composite 4, good, seek is happening. But let's take the cursor over seek and try to see, try to read between the, the fine print, as we say. So if you look at here carefully, now, this is not very intuitive, let me tell you, but yet I will tell you the conclusion of this. What's happening is, in composite 4, you are able to seek on first name, which is the first column, right? And the second column is email promotion. You're not able to seek on email promotion. And there is a reason. I will talk about that reason and the justification behind that in a moment. But here is the logic. In SQL Server, in this optimizer world, there is this concept of residual predicate. Residual predicates are the predicates on which the optimizer is not able to seek. And the seek predicates are the predicates on which the optimizer is able to seek. Now, you have the seek predicate section, and this is the residual predicate section. The moment I highlight these 2, you would come up here, Amit, in residual predicate section also, I can see all the attributes up there. Well, that's why I say that this is not very intuitive. But what really is happening is optimizer is seeking on first name, but is not able to seek on email promotion. However, the iterator still shows you as index seek, and that is the interesting part, because in SQL Server, in the set of the range of iterators and operators that are there, there is no iterator to show you partial seek, or there's no iterator to kind of distinguish that there was seek happening on one column but not the other column. So because it is a partial seek, it is still a seek, but yet you're not seeking on the second column, which is the residual predicate. Now let's and look at one more thing which I want to highlight here is, of course, it did seek, which is the partial seek, and it seeked on composite 4. Remember that. Now, those of you who had chosen composite 4, good, that wasn't a bad choice, but composite 5 here could be slightly better. Now I am going to create an index composite 5 with just switching the columns, right? Flipping the columns. So you have email promotion as the first column and first name as the second column. So when we go and execute this one and we have the index ready, let's go back and execute the query now. And let's see something very interesting. So we go to the execution plan. Seek is still happening, but if you investigate this further, let's go and jump into this. You will see that now the optimizer chooses contact composite 5. It does not choose contact composite 4. Now this really starts ringing some bell. You know, when I was learning all these things for the first time, I really wanted to investigate more. And the first question that I had in mind, wow, the residual predicate section still shows, but then I know how to decipher this one using XML plans, but I won't jump into that at this point. But right now, full seek is happening. The optimizer is able to seek on both the columns. Now, let me prove this to you first, that composite 5 is a better choice than composite 4. So what I can try to do here is, if I scroll down, what I've done is we can compare the performance of both the queries. We can run these two statements together. Both are the same queries, but in the second one, if you see, I'm putting a hint. I'm forcing the optimizer to use composite 4. Why am I doing it? You know that the first one will choose contact composite 5. For the second one, the optimizer will be forced to use contact composite 4. And then I can see if contact composite 4 and 5 from a performance perspective, are they same or are they different? So let's go and execute this and you will have the conclusion right in front of you. So let's go and execute, both of them execute, jump to the execution plan. And there you go. Let me just zoom this a bit. So you can see 41% versus 59%. This is the most interesting thing. If you look at the execution plan, both the execution plans look identical, the graphical ones at least. But if you dive deep into the XML version of the plans, they are different. And that is where you can differentiate that in first one, where you see the performance as 41% and the other one is more expensive. So the first one is using contact composite 5. Let's go and verify that. You take the cursor over this and you can see the object there, which says contact composite 5. And this is less expensive. The second one, which has the cost factor of 59%, uses contact composite 4 because we forced it. Remember, we gave an index hint there. And the metric, the metric between the two from a performance perspective, when you compare both the plans, you can clearly see that this is 41% versus 59%. So what is the conclusion? Why is this happening? The rule of the optimizer is that if you want to seek on the second column, let's say we are seeking on the second column. The first thing here to understand is we're always seeking on the first column, isn't it? Even when it was the first index, composite 4, or the second index, we were always seeking on the first column. The problem happened with the second column. So in contact composite 4, let me pull up the indexes to show the differentiation. So in contact composite 4, you were not able to seek on email promotion because there was no equality operator in the search criteria for the first column. That is the crux. For the first name, you're using the like operator. And the rule of the optimizer is if you want to seek on the second column or the subsequent columns, the previous columns need to have equality operator. Then only it can give you a definitive search and seek even on subsequent columns. In Contact Composite 5, this is less expensive as per the plan, and you have seen it. We put email promotion as the first column, and email promotion does use in its search criteria, in its predicate, the equality operator. So the optimizer is able to seek on email promotion, obviously, and it also lands up seeking on first name. Why? Because the previous column, email promotion, does use the equality operator. So these are the rules of optimizer, and really fine print, fine-grained detail on how you can improve performance of your T-SQL code. And look at this. I mean, we've done 3 examples till now. We're still in file number 2, but we've done 3 examples, and all of them you have seen how we are rewriting T-SQL, we are rewriting, we are redesigning the indexes a bit, etc. And I mean, both for developers or DBAs or architects or consultants, these are very common anti-patterns from a performance tuning perspective that we see with customers. So keep these optimizer rules in mind. This is just not enough. There are many more like these when you talk about searching, seeking, the index access methods, the cardinality estimation. A lot of intricacies are involved. Well, with this, we come to an end of the second demo. Let's close this and hope this is going well for you. So we have really tried to address why seek is not happening. Now, a small clarification there. In the third part of the second demo, the seek was happening, but it was a partial seek, right? And, you know, we talked about this residual predicate, etc. Let's go to the third one, which is implicit conversions. Now, implicit conversions, the moment I open up this file, you would be, hey, we know implicit conversion. This is being talked about all over the internet. And, you know, this is basic stuff. We know it. Well, you know it. And I do not doubt that. And I'm sure all of you know about implicit conversions, and they're bad. Why not try to ensure that we have similar data types on both sides of the equality operator? But I'm trying to show you a different flavor of it. So let's look at the demo, and then you decide for yourself if it was good for you. So we'll use AdventureWorks 2016 again, and we'll turn on set statistics time. The first part of this demo is going to be very, very straightforward. And let's go over that very quickly just to set the base and foundation for all of you. And we execute this, you get the output. Let's go to the execution plan. Now, when you look at this execution plan, you will see a warning symbol on the select operator, which clearly says that something is going wrong there, which is good. At least I get that hint. And it says that type conversion in expression, something, something, and may affect seek plan in query plan choice. So the optimizer, SQL Management Studio, is clearly giving me a hint that there is an issue with conversion here. And now if you look at this account number equals to certain literal that you're comparing to, if I take the cursor over account number, you can clearly see that this is of type varchar, the account number. And on the right-hand side of the equality operator, you have nvarchar constant. You have an nvarchar string. So you have put a prefix here called n, which makes it a Unicode data, and it becomes a nvarchar. This little thing is causing a problem, and SQL Server will have to decide to convert the from data type and the to data type. In this case, it will take a bit of time to decide that conversion from varchar to nvarchar. If you go to the messages tab here, I turn that on, and I can see that SQL Server did spend about 344 milliseconds on CPU, right? This was the amount of time the thread spent on the CPU for this conversion thing to be done, or for the entire query. Keep this number in mind, 344 milliseconds. Now, the fix for this is quite simple. I'll just remove this n. Now, of course, you need to identify, make changes to this T-SQL. All that is required. And that's where the rewriting skills also come into picture. Let's go and execute this. Now, what I have done, you have varchar on both sides, right? The literal as well as the data type, the column data type, which is varchar on the left-hand side of the equality operator. Let's go and execute this. First, if you go into the execution plan, neat and clean plan, no warning symbols, all good. If you go to the messages tab here, now if you scroll down, you can see that hardly any time was spent on CPU from a technical thread perspective, which means 0 milliseconds. It's not 0 milliseconds, but of course it is negligible because now you are not performing that conversion. Now, this was the very basic example about implicit conversions and how they are bad for query performance. When I did present this in some other forums, I did get these questions like, hey, Amit, does it really matter to bother about every millisecond here, I mean, does it really make it worth to investigate? Well, every millisecond does matter because you are looking at this query from a single execution perspective. But if you just kind of look at the larger magnitude, these are classic OLTP queries, right, which are embedded in stored procedures and ad hoc queries that get fired from client applications, and hundreds of users are firing such queries throughout business hours. So multiply that, and if you look at the total magnitude, it's quite high. Now I will show you an example of that. So let me jump over to the Windows Explorer, and I'm using RML utilities. And in RML utilities, we have an executable called ostress. Let me open up the CMD file and show this to you. So let's go and edit this. So what I'm trying to do now, let me stress SQL Server. I am stressing SQL Server. I'm calling this ostress utility, and I have this query, the same query that I showed you in this file, 31conversion.sql. I'm going to start 50 threads, right? 50 users are going to execute this query 50 times. So 50 into 50, close to 2,500 iterations, so to say, and we will record how much time it takes. And then we will fix the query and we'll run this again and see how much time this takes. So just to speed up a bit, why not play with this a bit, and instead of 50, just make it 30. We'll save some seconds, right? I mean, life in SQL Server is all about saving a few seconds. So 50 users are going to run this query 30 times each. Let's do that. And which is the file? 3_1 conversion. This is the one, friends. So if you see, this has this implicit conversion problem, and I'm going to call this. So let's go back and double click on our CMD file, and let's stress SQL Server. Now, 50 threads are being created here. You can observe here at the bottom that worker threads created, and the execution has begun now, and it's running that iteration. And when it is complete, it is going to give me the total execution time, the total elapsed time it has taken. And it might take about 30 to 40 seconds, or maybe even slightly less. Now, I do test SQL Server in such simple ways. When you have a workload, how is it going to behave with multiple users? This testing is quite critical for developers in their dev and test environment, because sometimes when we write these queries, we kind of test them against small tables, small set of data, and we don't do these stress testing. And these are very basic tests that probably anyone can perform with this simple utility. I mean, we don't have to create thousands of threads, just a few threads running things in loop and trying to test. Wow, this is still running, so it's just taking a bit of time there. And let's see, and maybe you can frame up some questions and put them in the Q&A on the platform. We did put that as 30 seconds, so it's still running. Let's go back. And what we are going to do is, once we record the time, I'm just going to fix this, right? Remove that prefix and then test that again, and that's going to be much faster. So great, we are done with this, friends. So this has taken about 1 minute 19 seconds. I expected that this could be faster, but anyway, 1 minute 19 seconds is what this has taken. So let's call this as 80 seconds, right? 60 seconds plus 20 approximately. This took 80 seconds. Okay, press any key to continue. So let's close this, and now let's fix this. We are fixing this conversion, we're rewriting, we're fixing this. Let's save this, and this is your test. Now let's call this again. I'm double clicking this, and we are running this, and let's see how much time it takes now. Now there's going to be no conversion. And you know what this is done, friends? This has just taken 4 seconds. Look at the magnitude now. From 80 seconds, you bring down the total execution to 4 seconds. So if 200 or 300 milliseconds were not convincing enough, this probably should be convincing. So I took a little bit of time, but to answer that, yes, every millisecond does count, because if you just look at the scale and magnitude of it, it does make sense. Now, I did tell you that, my demo here would not be just about a simple conversion, but I tried to show you the magnitude of it. But I want to go one step deeper and show you something else. So let's go back to, let me close this one and go back to, what about explicit conversions, friends, right? You are leaving this decision about conversion to SQL Server. What if you tell SQL Server how you want conversion to happen? And this is what I'm trying to show you here. explicit conversion performance. And I can tell you that explicit conversion works much better than implicit conversion. You decide and just tell SQL Server what to do, works better. Look at the performance aspect of this. The same query here, where you have this string, which is in varchar, and you're telling SQL Server that convert it to varchar, so that you have the same data types on both sides of the equality operator. Let's execute this and see performance aspect. So when we execute this, all good. You go into the execution plan, you get a good execution plan, no warning symbols. And when you jump to the messages tab, you need to watch out on the CPU time. Hooray, the CPU time is 0 milliseconds, right? So explicit conversion works better. Now, these are things that are kind of less known. I've seen people do have that knowledge that implicit conversions are not good, and we try to make sure that we have the same data type on both sides of the equality operator. But I've kind of seen that people are not knowing this, that maybe explicit conversions can even solve this problem. So please keep that in mind. Well, with this, we have completed 3 demos. Okay, let's developer best practices. Let's jump to the 4th one, and 4th one again is relatively very simple. In fact, my 4th demo and the 5th is about dynamic SQL. And I'll tell you, all of you have been using dynamic SQL, and you know that it is so powerful. And I love dynamic SQL. It gives so much power. It gives so much flexibility. But a few things go bad with dynamic SQL, and I'm trying to highlight that bad part, because as developers, you just got to be aware of it. SQL injection, I'm sure you might be aware of it. So I'll quickly take you through it and then move on to another advanced example with dynamic SQL related to parameterization. Well, parameterization is something that I'm covering here also, but you will see in another example more about performance. So this example is not much about performance, but probably more about security SQL injection. So first, what I will do is drop these objects if they had already existed. So I'm going to use AdventureWorks 2016, and let's do that quickly. So we will drop these objects if they were there, and let's do a quick setup. I'm going to drop the stored procedure if they were there, and of course you will have all the scripts, so they're well documented for you to use. Let's create a drop this schema as well. Okay, now let's start. We're creating a schema called dummy, nice name, authorization DBO. So we'll authorize DBO for that. And then we are going to create a stored procedure. Now, if you look at this stored procedure, this is static SQL. Now, first, I'm trying to show you static SQL, and then I'm going to show you dynamic SQL. If you look at the SQL stored procedure, quite straightforward. It takes one parameter, product name, and then there is a simple select statement there, which will fetch you the data where the product name is equal to the value that you supply. So let's go ahead and create this stored procedure. Job done. Let's move forward. And now we are going to execute the stored procedure. So we say that execute the stored procedure, product name is equal to, let's say, shorts. And when we execute this, you will see that you get 10 records. Now, there are 10 records in our product table here, production.product, where we have shorts in the name of the product. Remember, the value is 10. Now, this is static SQL. And if there are hackers and malicious users who are trying to infiltrate into your SQL Server environment by trying to inject invalid code. Let's say if I try to write something like execute the stored procedure where product name is equal to shorts or 1 equals to 1. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to circumvent against SQL Server security, and I'm trying to take advantage of certain loopholes by trying to inject this statement. Let's go and execute this. What you will see that SQL Server is just not returning any data, because the parameters that get sent now, the filtering criteria that gets sent to the stored procedure is kind of invalid, right? Because there is no product which where the entire string matches the product name, because you put or 1 equals to 1 and you get an empty result set. Well, static SQL is protecting you at least from this SQL injection attack, right? This was a very simple example of static SQL. Now, what happens is, you know, how is this entire thing treated, right? If you take this statement of the stored procedure, this is how you are sending it to SQL Server. So stored procedure internally gets this statement after it substitutes the value in the parameter, where name is like this value. And of course, there is no product with this name, because the hacker was trying to inject And with static SQL, it did not work. And just to run this once again, you will see that this is an empty result set. But friends, what happens when you will end up using dynamic SQL with a similar example? See the repercussions. So now what we have done is we are modifying the stored procedure, and instead of putting my static SQL, I'm using dynamic SQL here. I put this string, this select statement inside a variable DQ, and I'm using exec statement to execute this statement dynamically. Where are the product information coming from? The same parameter gets concatenated. So you can say plus @prod name. This is dangerous. So let's go and execute this. And we have modified the stored proc. Let's go and execute this one, right? This is the one that was creating, we wanted to test out. Now, if you run this one and see, what do you get? Wow, you get all the product names now. At least static SQL was better, but look at this injection. Injection here has worked with dynamic SQL. You're just not getting shorts, but you're just getting all the products. Because with this injection, how is SQL Server treating this code? Look at or 1 equals to 1, and then we comment the code out later, even if there was something else after that. So SQL Server internally compiles the code as where name like shorts or 1 is equal to 1, and 1 will always be equal to 1. So you just get the full listing of the product, right? So the malicious user has succeeded. And if you go and execute this, of course, you're going to get all the records. So this is SQL injection, and SQL injection is just not limited to this. And I will just randomly quickly show you how dangerous this can be. And I mean, despite this is known, still we need to know the impact, the repercussions of how bad it can go. Now look at this statement, right? We are the same stored procedure where product name is equal to source, and we write union all select name 111 from sys.databases, right? Again, the malicious user is kind of trying to be smart enough and trying to inject some code. And if you go and execute this, see what you get. You're able to list down all the databases that are there on the server, isn't it? By firing the user stored procedure, which is in a way infected with SQL injection because it's using dynamic SQL. And here comes the interesting part. Can this user find out the server name? If I execute this code, you will get an error, right? But you get to know the name of the server from the error. These are tricky things. What you can achieve with dynamic SQL and this SQL injection problem. And the worst of all, friends, look at this. I am executing the same stored procedure. I'm putting my criteria shorts, and with that, I'm putting a create database statement. Let me refresh this database here on the Object Explorer, and you can see that there is no database with the name of SQL Maestros CQLI. But when I execute this, the stored procedure gets executed without any errors. And when I right click and refresh the Object Explorer, keep your eye, and you can see that database up there, SQL Maestros underscore SQL LI. So you see what the malicious user has done is executed the stored procedure. Of course, your query would be that we need permissions and all of that, but think about this. I mean, where do we really have 100% secured permissions and best practices being followed? There are always these loopholes that are ready to be exploited. And then you can drop the database as well. Let's go and drop this database using the same user stored procedure. So we right click, this was done, and we refresh, this database is gone. So quite dangerous. Now, let's see how you can avoid. Enough of those examples as to how bad it is, but let's see how to avoid. So of course, first thing is do not throw database errors on the client application. You can implement try catch, raise error, and all of that stuff inside T-SQL. T-SQL now has robust error handling procedure statements. So do that. Second thing is perform input validations. That's important. And then the best of all, I really like this, and the best practices is explicit parameterization. So let's go and do this. So we have this alter stored proc, and first you can see that we are checking and doing input validation, that if there is product name like, and we are seeing that malicious user is trying to inject some invalid characters, we catch it then and there and raise an error. Okay, so this is what we do. Let's go and and if everything goes well, then we are executing the statement. So if you alter the stored proc, let's try to execute this, and you will see that we are now injecting the comment sign there, special characters, and you can see possible SQL injection attempt, and of course the code gets aborted. And the other thing is explicit parameterization, and I really love it. And I'm covering this in the next example as well. So you have this param definition that you declare, and you say that this param definition is nvarchar 500, and you specify that my parameter definition has product name, which is of nvarchar 50. And then you declare your statement, and you say that my statement where name is equal to the parameter definition prod underscore name. So this here and this here should match, obviously. And then you execute using sp underscore execute SQL. You supply the variable that has the string. You supply the param definition, which is this. And then where are the values coming from? They are coming from prod underscore name, which is prod underscore name is your local variable. And where is the local variable getting the value from? It's getting the value from the stored procedure parameter. So this is how you do explicit parameterization. Friends, this is the best technique. So let's go and execute this and alter the proc and safely execute your dynamic SQL. You wouldn't really get any issues at all. Right, friends. So let's go and do the cleanup. This is, and I'm going to cover explicit parameterization again in another example. So this was the fourth demo. Let's go and jump into the fifth one where I talk about explicit parameterization again. And I'll jump over this one quickly because I think the last example is even more important. And because I talked about explicit parameterization, I'll take this over quickly. And this one is also about explicit parameterization. So if you look at this query, let's scroll down, and it has a lot of code, but let's go to the crux of it. Look at this query that is there in front of you. We are again using dynamic SQL here, and I'm showing you a different impact of not explicitly parameterizing your query. We say select a few columns from this table, human resources employee, where manager ID is equal to some value. Now, let's say there are 100 managers, and I'm just trying to run this code in a loop for each manager ID. And I say that count value is less than 100, and then I'm concatenating my manager ID is equal to, and I'm replacing it with the CNT variable. So this code is going to run with manager ID is equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And now if you look at the dynamic SQL execution, I'm using sp execute SQL stored procedure, and I'm supplying the dynamic SQL local variable string there. Now, the problem with this is, let's free the proc cache first and take two statements in another window, because I want to show you the repercussions of not explicitly parameterizing. So this will do our job. So let's copy them and put them into a new window and just try to see how many plans do we have in the plan cache. So before we execute, let's go ahead and free the proc cache once more and jump over this here and execute. So what you can see right now that there are two plans in the plan cache, and two plans, and the total size of the plan cache is just 192 kilobytes. Now, DBCC free proc cache or DBCC drop clean buffers, make sure that you're not running them in the production environment. This is just a demo. So I'm playing around and trying to show you a few things. So two plans and the total size is 192 kilobytes. And now let's go and execute this statement here. Now, the problem with this is, while this is running, I will talk about this. For each execution of this statement with a manager ID 1, 2, 3, 4, it's being treated as an ad hoc query, and you will have 100 plans being created in the plan cache. This is why this goes so bad, and this is what we call as plan cache bloating. This is a very common mistake that developers make, where they don't explicitly parameterize their queries. Because of this lack of explicit parameterization, for each execution of the query with its respective exclusive parameter value, a unique plan gets created and gets injected into the plan cache. After execution, let's go and see what has happened. Note, the previous values were two plans, total size 192 kilobytes. And if you execute this now, you can see that there are 107 plans and the total size is close to 2 megabytes. I can tell you that out of this 107 plans, 100 plans belong to the statement that we just ran. And let's prove that with another query. So SQL Server has a lot of these wonderful DMVs, right? And I mean, you can do some incredible and amazing stuff with them. So there is this DMV dim exec query stats, which has a column called query hash. Now remember, all these queries are identical. The only thing that differentiates them is the parameter value, right? Manager ID 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the only differentiating factor. So when I run this query and I group by the query hash, I can actually group all the queries that have a similar signature, but probably different parameter values. And when you run this, you can clearly see that this query, select employee ID, which is our query that we ran, has 100 entries into the plan cache. This is the problem. And this has a lot of repercussions. If you go into this, this is going to be really an endless discussion. Plan cache bloating, so many plans being compiled, excess CPU utilization, excess memory utilization. It does just so much bad to your SQL Server environment. What is the fix? Well, the fix is to explicitly parameterize your query. And friends, this is very similar to what I just showed you in the previous example, which is dynamic SQL, the bad of it. Now, this is the good one of it, where you're explicitly parameterizing. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm declaring a variable called param definition nvarchar 500. I am telling that in my parameter definition, there is going to be one parameter manager ID. Data type is going to be tiny int. And then in my select statement in SQL string variable, I say that this is my select statement where manager ID is equal to the variable, the parameter @manager ID, which I have defined here. So this and this has to be same. And then comes the straightforward part, which is executing it. This is a little, cumbersome in some sense, T-SQL syntaxes. You just kind of have to get used to it and follow it. So execute the dynamic SQL, which is in SQL string variable. My definitions, my parameter definitions come from this variable. And then for each parameter, I need to supply the parameter name and where is the value coming from. So this is my name manager ID and the value is coming from @CNT. So before we execute this, let's go and free the proc cache and see what do we have now. Okay, back to square one. We have two plans, 192 kilobytes, and let's go and execute the query and see what happens. You will also notice that this might execute a little faster compared to previous execution, but that is less important. What is of course more important, that after the execution is complete, and I'm just still waiting for this to complete, we should go and try to see how much time has this taken.
Amit, it's Craig here. I just wanted to jump in. You have about 5 minutes before Q&A, which is another 15, just so you know. We have
Absolutely.
lots of questions.
Okay, great. So we go and execute this now, and you can see that there are four plans now, and you have 264 kilobytes. This is what you wanted, right? So you just have one parameterized plan in the plan cache when you did explicit parameterization of a parameterized query. And you can see there is no more plan cache bloating, and you have 264 kilobytes. That is great. That is winner. So keep these developer best practices in mind. And friends, the last one before we jump into the query, the question, sorry. So this is going quite heavy. A lot of demos. Hope you're enjoying it. So last one, maybe I will overshoot maybe by 2-3 minutes. Let's just quickly go and do this one. So we are using AdventureWorks 2016, and we have some tables here, big product and transactions. And I'm just writing a simple statement with cross apply, trying to get some data into hash X there into a temporary table. Let's just quickly go and execute and see how much time this takes. And we'll turn on actual execution plan. Let's go and execute. And we are going to see that this may take about 6 to 7 seconds. And there's so many learnings from this example. We'll just go a little more quicker than I would have originally done because of time constraints. So this is done. And friends, this has taken about 9 seconds. If you go and look into the execution plan, all looks good. It's a parallel plan. Everything is fine. No issues. Now, this is a query where you are doing a select into this temporary table, which is hash X. So you're selecting from big product table and you're doing a cross apply with another inner expression on DBO transaction. Well, the logic is not important, some filtering, but what is important is that this is running absolutely fine. It takes about 9 seconds. And now let's say for some other department, for some other application, there was a need to add customer ID, an additional column into this particular table, and it was not your need. And I'll tell you, these things do happen at customer places and always happening. And I'm sure you're trying to correlate this even with your environment. So customer ID column gets added to the transactions table. Your workload should not be affected. This is a need of some other reporting requirement. Let's drop this table hash X And to be fair, let's free the proc cache and the buffers because the pages are loaded from disk into memory. Now let's go back and run the same query again. First, let's run it. Execution plan is turned on, and let's see how much time it takes. Now, the most interesting part of this is that there was no change to the data. Absolutely no change. And yet the query takes much more time. We have already shot by 11 seconds, 12 seconds, and it is still running. Now, no change in data, only a column modification was done into transactions table, and it affects your query. Now, this is really to do something with developers. And I'm trying to show you a great example of how the one of the most basic developer best practice gets violated. And that saying that queries are running so slow that I can actually go and have a cup of coffee in the cafeteria, but here I will just have a glass of water. And the query is still running, isn't it? So before this takes more time, why not take this query and see what is the problem with this in another window and let that run and look into estimated execution plan and see what does the optimizer think of it. So if you look at this particular query and look at the execution plan, you will be able to figure out there are a lot of things to look into this, but of course, so this one is done. So why not jump into the actual execution of the query here now? Okay. And let's go and look into the execution plan. There you go. This is done. Friends, this has taken 1 minute, 9 seconds. Look at this. So earlier it took just about 9 seconds, but now it has taken 1 minute, 9 seconds. And of course you can see sort problems and all of that. Well, I would have gone into longer discussions, but let's just quickly wrap this up by showing you where really the problem is. And you can see that even though there is some warning there and I would really want to investigate sort is not the problem because I can see the cost factor is 7% and most likely this is something to do with spilling. But the real culprit here is this bookmark lookup, which has 80% cost. This wasn't there earlier in the previous execution. So I would want to investigate this. So if you take the cursor over this and zoom in, you can clearly identify that it took that much time because the number of executions was 3.9 million. 3.9 million times it jumped from index and all the way to the base table to fetch a column. And it is doing it 3.9 million times because the transactions table is big. And which column was it trying to fetch? It was trying to fetch customer ID. There you go, friends. So this is the problem. And you're trying to correlate this now back to the first demo where we did indexes and bookmark lookups and scanning and seeking. You see how the world is 360 degree and you come back to the same thing again. Well, bookmark lookups sometimes can go as bad as this, even though you did not do any change to your data. But really the best, testing these queries with real data in your test environment is one thing that you should be doing. Of course, the second is thing to keep an eye on this bookmark lookup because sometimes they make really create havoc. But the learning for this session, because of the topic developer best practice here is the violation of the best practice. Friends, select star. Why would you put select star here? Bookmark lookup optimizer implements bookmark lookup because customer ID as a new column for this table is not in the index, which it originally used when that column did not exist. But now because you added customer ID and your query says select star, it wants all the column. Remember, customer ID as an attribute was for a different reporting requirement or for a different client application, but your query gets badly affected. If your query just had all the columns that you wanted, and these are the columns that you wanted, which are readily available in an index, and it could just do a covering index scan to fetch all the data, this job was done. So if I can fix this, you don't have to really create new indexes or anything as the index hint would recommend, which I see many developers, DBAs would land up doing. All you have to do is just make sure that you replace star with the columns that you really need. Then your query will not be affected with changes that are being done at the database, at the table end. Any schematic changes should not affect the performance of your query. So if you run this now, and let's see how much time this takes. Yes, we are done. Back to 9 seconds, as you can see. Well, with this, friends, we come to an end of all the demos, developer best practices. I know we have just some time left. So let's quickly jump over to questions. And wow, there are so many questions. So some of you just wanted script. If you just readily want this, the scripts, if I have the permission, I can just put down I will readily send this to you. Connect with ab@sqlmaestros.com. Just drop an email here and I'll straight away shoot this. And I will, of course, upload it with Past Summit so that it is available for you in the portal as well. So just trying to fix this. And let's take up the questions now. Okay, so we have questions. I will start from beginning. Okay, Amit, will these example queries be provided for download? Of course, I'm going to provide these for downloads, but those of you who immediately want to play with this, I just want to do a bit of polishing. You can just drop me an email here, connect with ab@sqlmaestros.com, and I'm here online. I'm part of Past Summit today, just like you, and I'm going to shoot out emails to all of you. Is there any way to, okay, fine. Next question. What if, next question is, one of the attendees is asking, what if you skip a column in the middle of the index where last name is equal to May and middle name is Jimmy? Yes, so you have 3 columns. So if you skip a middle column, you will seek on the first column, but you will not be able to seek on the third column because you're breaking that left-based subset searching. And this is really what the other demo of first name, middle name, and last name was all about. The demo about the email promotion thing, right? We were using 3 columns. Another question, wasn't the second column of the index middle name? How do you identify a partial seek? It is just when not. So first question is, wasn't the second column of the index middle name? Well, I don't really remember that, but when you have the scripts, you can play around with it. But yes, the idea was that it in the first example, it was only last name and first name, but yeah, you may just want to check that. How do you identify a partial seek? This is where the challenge is, that the optimizer tooltip is not very intuitive. So I just kind of look into the XML plan. I wish I could have shown you that XML plan and where you can dive deep and you can actually find out which are my seek predicates and which are my residual predicates. But time did not allow me. So graphical execution plan is just not very intuitive there. Okay, we have questions if you need. Okay, fine. I'm just reading out the questions, friends. Will seek work with column mentioned in index under includes part? Right. So seek will not work with columns that are using the include section. So remember, in index definition, you have columns that you put in the index definition. Those are the only columns on which you can seek. The columns that are there in the include, they're only available for the purpose of covering, for the purpose of retrieving, and they're only available at the leaf level. That is the reason why you cannot seek on columns that are there in included, because they are not there on root page and intermediate pages. Only the columns that are there in the index definition are in the root and intermediate level on which you can seek. That answers the next question. Okay, then we have more questions. Where is the stress tool? Is it part of SQL Server install or third-party tool? Well, this set of RML utilities was developed by the SQL Server team. So just go to your favorite search engine, Google, and you can type in RML utilities x64, because I don't want you to download the 32-bit version and you will get access to it. It does not come part of the default SQL Server installation. Which data type is better to choose, varchar or nvanchar? Well, this is very subjective. Really depends on a lot of different factors on the requirement of what kind of data you want to store. So I would want to skip it, but maybe you may want to send over some questions to my email and I'll try to answer. How do you plan to send the examples to the attendees? Well, immediately, if you wish, you may want to have it, because I didn't upload it in the Past Summit portal because I was making changes. I was fine-tuning a bit, but now it's ready and I will upload. But if you immediately want it, just drop a mail and I'll send it across to you. Okay, we have more. Will plan cache bloating reduce performance? Will plan cache, now again subjective, but try to understand. Memory is a very important resource. With plan cache bloating, I'm consuming a lot of extra memory. In my example, at least this plan was very small. So it just took about 2 MB, 100 plans of similar type took about 2 MB. But in real world, if you take that query, which does the grouping of the plans by hash, you can see that this is plaguing your environment, and it could be hundreds of MBs where which could be saved. Remember, SQL Server has this total memory which it divides and it sends it to It uses it for the buffer pool, the plan cache, and so many different memory clerks, which are the consumers. And you know what happens, like every clerk has a threshold. If you go beyond that threshold, let's say for this plan cache, if you go beyond the threshold, SQL Server will start kicking out the plans from the plan cache. And the whole idea of plan cache is reusability. You want those plans to be there in the plan cache so that the similar query, when it comes, the plan can be reused. So you don't want those plans to be kicked out. So in short, yes, it is about performance. And if you reduce plan cache bloating, you are definitely helping improve performance. Can you use parameterized queries from C# passing query and parameter? Of course, yes. From client application, when you're writing code in C#, VB.NET, and when you're using these SQL Server classes, you can create explicit parameters there in the code, and you can parameterize from the client side also. You can very well do it. I mean, just search on internet. There could be so many relevant examples. Would an if exists also relieve the issue with using select star? I don't know about this one. Maybe I'm not able to correlate this with example was this. Yes. So this answers all the questions that I have right now in front of me. And hope you enjoyed this session and you enjoyed all the demos. It was a roller coaster ride. I mean, with back-to-back 6 demos, I'm happy that I'm able to cover all the demos. Wonderful start to PaaS Summit general sessions, and hope you're enjoying this event. And drop me an email here. And yes, if you like the session, please do tweet @A_Bansal is where I am. And you know PaaS handle, which is @SQL PaaS. We'll be happy to see some of your tweets and would be happy to connect with some of you. And you need the scripts immediately. I'm zipping it right now after the session and will send it to you. Well, with this, thank you very much. I thank you, all of you to attend, who have attended this session. Thanks, Craig, for helping me moderate the questions. All of you, whichever part of the world you are in, have a great event. Rest of it, it has just begun. So many great sessions, so many great speakers, great community event. You have fun time. Thank you and goodbye.